He was supposed to be invisible, a nameless old man mopping floors while officers toasted their success. But that night, one commander couldn't resist reminding him of his place. The room laughed, until the laughter stopped. Because when the old man finally looked up, something in his eyes changed everything. It wasn't anger, it was recognition. And in that instant, the commander's arrogance met the one truth he never expected to face. The man he humiliated had once saved his own blood. It was supposed to be just another evening at the naval base. The officers' banquet was in full swing, crystal glasses clinking, laughter bouncing off the polished walls, uniforms gleaming under soft golden light. Amid the celebration, Elias Carter, the base janitor, moved quietly through the room. His gray coveralls were clean but faded, his dark hands rough from years of scrubbing other men's messes. Most barely noticed him. Others looked through him like he was part of the floor he cleaned. Elias had spent decades serving people who would never remember his name. To him, the work was steady, honest. To them, he was just the help. Yet beneath his quiet demeanor was a man who had lived through storms few in that room could imagine. Across the hall, Commander Ryan Marshall stood at the center of attention. Young, white, decorated, proud of his rising reputation. He liked control and he liked being seen. So when his eyes caught the janitor in the corner, wiping the floor near the portraits of war heroes, something about it bothered him. The image didn't fit the perfection he demanded. As the night carried on, Elias kept working, unaware that the smallest gesture, a respectful nod, a pause too long near the commander's table, would be enough to ignite an old prejudice that had never truly died. What neither of them knew was that by the end of the night, the power in that room would shift forever, and the man everyone ignored would become impossible to forget. Elias had been invisible for so long that silence had become his shield. But that night something felt different. He could sense the weight of eyes on him, watching, waiting, judging. The laughter from the officers' table grew louder, sharper, and he caught fragments that stung like old wounds. "Must be nice," someone said, "cleaning up after real heroes." They didn't need to say his name. Elias had heard versions of that line his entire life. Still, he kept moving, steady, methodical, quiet. Trouble was something he'd learned to avoid long ago. Commander Ryan Marshall leaned back in his chair, his confidence radiating like a badge of entitlement. The more the wine flowed, the looser his tongue became. "Hey, old man," he called across the room, voice heavy with mockery. "You missed a spot." A few officers snickered. Elias turned, gave a polite nod, and wiped the same spotless tile again. Then he stood, shoulders squared, saying nothing. But Ryan wasn't done. "You should be grateful," he said, smiling thinly. "You get to work here because men like me keep you safe." The air shifted. Half the room went quiet, the other half unsure whether to laugh. Elias said nothing, though the words burned. He'd fought men like Ryan's kind before, the ones who believed power gave them worth. Ryan rose from his seat and approached, each step deliberate. "Tell me something," he said, circling Elias. "You ever actually do anything that mattered? Or have you always been just background?" Elias met his eyes. His voice was calm but carried the weight of experience. "I did my part," he said simply. That calmness irritated Ryan. "Your part?" he barked. "You wouldn't last a day in real combat." Uneasy laughter rippled again. Even those who joined in didn't like how it sounded. Elias turned, gripping his mop, ready to leave. But Ryan's voice followed him, cutting through the room. "Wait, you said you did your part. So what was it, huh? Shining boots? Carrying bags?" Elias stopped mid-stride. The room froze. He didn't turn, not at first. When he finally spoke, his words were quiet, but they hit like thunder. "Call sign. Falcon 0, the mop slipped from his hands. The sound echoed off the marble floor. The laughter vanished. Faces turned. Ryan's smile collapsed. He blinked, confusion flashing into disbelief. That name, he knew it. His father had spoken it once, years ago, when telling stories of a daring pilot who had led a mission no one thought survivable. Falcon 0, the man who saved them all. Now that same man stood before him, wearing a janitor's uniform. Elias didn't look back. He simply said, "If you'll excuse me, sir." "I have work to finish," and as he walked away, the commander who once demanded respect was left standing in silence, his pride crumbling beneath the weight of a truth he could no longer ignore. For a few seconds, no one moved. The sound of Falcon Zero still hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. The officers glanced at one another, trying to piece together what they'd just heard. But Commander Ryan Marshall, he stood frozen, pale, his confidence draining like color from his face. He whispered the name under his breath, almost as if testing if it could be true. Falcon Zero. His father had spoken that name in reverence. A legendary pilot, a man who led a near-suicidal rescue mission during the Eastern conflict decades ago. According to every story, Falcon Zero's courage had saved dozens of men, including one young lieutenant named James Marshall. Ryan's father, Elias Falcon Zero, hadn't just served. He had saved the very bloodline that now stood in front of him, mocking him. A cold wave of silence spread through the hall. The same officers who had laughed moments ago now stared at the old janitor with something between awe and shame. The man they'd ignored was a living war hero, and the man they respected was shrinking under the weight of his own ignorance. Ryan stepped forward, his voice shaking. "That can't be true," he muttered. Falcon Zero was a... He stopped himself before finishing. The next word hovered on his tongue but never came out. Black man Elias didn't flinch. He simply turned, his expression calm, steady, resolute. "You don't have to believe it," he said softly. "Your father did." Gasps rippled through the room. A few officers exchanged glances. They'd heard the stories too. And now, standing before them, the truth was undeniable. Ryan's chest tightened. Shame burned through his pride like fire. Every insult, every arrogant word echoed back in his mind until the weight became unbearable. He looked at Elias, not as a janitor, not as someone beneath him, but as the man who had once risked his life so Ryan's father could live. I didn't know," Ryan stammered. Elias gave a small nod. "That's the thing about history," he said, his eyes locked on Ryan's. "Some people forget it. Others live with it every day." And with that, he walked out of the hall, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt sacred. Ryan stood alone amid the remnants of laughter and pride, realizing too late that the man he'd humiliated had carried a kind of honor he could never understand. The echo of those two words, Falcon Zero, followed him long after Elias was gone. The next morning, the banquet hall looked different. The laughter, the arrogance, the noise, it had all vanished, leaving behind the quiet weight of realization. Commander Ryan Marshall arrived early, still haunted by the night before. He stood in the same spot where he had mocked an old man, his reflection staring back at him in the polished floor that Elias had cleaned to perfection. The janitor's closet was empty. No tools, no mop, just a folded uniform left neatly on a chair. On top of it, a small badge, old and worn, engraved with two words that now felt sacred: Falcon Zero. Ryan picked it up with trembling hands. He'd grown up idolizing the man his father said saved his life, never imagining that same hero had once been forced to scrub floors for men who couldn't see past his skin. That realization shattered something inside him, something built on comfort, privilege, and ignorance. In the following weeks, whispers spread across the base. Some tried to justify what happened, others tried to forget. But for many, it became a moment they couldn't shake, the night they saw what dignity looked like when the world tried to erase it. Ryan requested a transfer soon after, not out of shame alone, but out of understanding. He began visiting veterans' homes, looking for names, stories, faces that history had hidden. He stopped introducing himself as Commander Marshall. Now he started with, "My father was saved by a man named Elias Carter, Falcon Zero." But Elias? He never came back to that hall. Some said he retired quietly. Others said he moved to a small town where no one cared about rank or color, only kindness. Whatever the truth, his name began to spread, one story at a time, carried by those who had witnessed that night. And maybe that's how justice sometimes begins, not with noise or punishment, but with a moment that forces people to see. Because racism doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it hides behind laughter, power, or silence. But every once in a while, a single act, a single truth breaks through it. Elias didn't need medals or apologies. He had something far greater, the quiet victory of knowing he'd lived with honor in a world that often denied him dignity. And as Ryan stood outside, holding that badge against the morning light, he understood something his uniform had never taught him. Respect isn't earned through rank, it's earned through character. So maybe the question isn't who we salute in public, but who we overlook in silence.